The humidity hung heavy over the neighborhood, the kind of thick, stagnant air that makes you feel like you're breathing through a wet blanket. I stood on my porch, coffee mug in hand, watching the patrol SUV round the corner. It didn't crawl, it cruised with a predatory intent, the tires crunching over the gravel with a rhythmic, deliberate weight. He pulled up to the curb, the engine idling in a low, mechanical growl. My neighbor's husband, Officer Miller, didn't turn off the engine. He let the strobe lights flicker once, twice, a silent notification of his presence. He stepped out, adjusting his duty belt, the leather creaking in the morning quiet. Behind him, emerging from the passenger side like a shadow with a clipboard, was Karen. She didn't look at me, she looked at the house, her eyes scanning for a stray weed or a trash can left out 5 minutes too long. She wore oversized sunglasses that reflected the sun like two cold black mirrors. "Ma'am," Miller said, his voice echoing off the pavement. He didn't use my name, he used the title like a weapon. He tapped the iron gate of my fence, his silver badge gleaming against the navy of his uniform. "We're here for the keys, you're forfeiting your community privileges, HOA directive." I didn't move, I didn't set my coffee down. I just leaned against the doorframe, feeling the cool wood against my shoulder. I've spent 22 years in the Army. I've stood in dirt-clogged outposts where the air tasted like copper and diesel, waiting for commands that meant life or death. A man in a crisp uniform acting as his wife's personal muscle didn't trigger my fight or flight. It triggered my observe and document. "The pool keys?" Karen piped up, stepping forward. Her smile was a jagged thing, sugar-coated and razor-sharp. "Until your compliance issues are resolved, the board has voted to revoke access. Hand them over and we won't have to take this further." I took a slow sip of coffee, it was still hot. "The board," I repeated, my voice flat calm, "and you sent a police officer to collect a plastic key fob for a neighborhood pool." "I'm acting as a representative of the law, ensuring a peaceful transfer of property," Miller said, his hand resting near his holster. It was a classic intimidation tactic. The high-ready stance, he wanted me to look at the gun, he wanted me to feel small. I looked him straight in the eyes, not at the badge, not at the belt. "Technically, Miller, you're on a city-funded clock acting as a private courier for your wife's hobby. That's a bold choice for someone so close to a promotion cycle." The smirk on his face faltered for a fraction of a second, a crack in the armor. "The keys," Karen hissed, her composure slipping. "Now." I reached into my pocket, pulled out the fob, and held it up. They both reached for it instinctively. I dropped it into the dirt at their feet. "Pick it up," I said softly, "and tell the board I'll see them at the hearing." People think this is about a place to swim. It never is. It's about the geography of power, who gets to draw the lines, who gets to decide who belongs. I bought this house because I wanted the silence I'd earned. I read every line of the closing documents. I knew what I was signing. My property was an out parcel, a piece of land that existed before the subdivision, never legally absorbed into the HOA's restrictive covenants. I had signed a voluntary amenities contract for the pool and gym, but my land was a sovereign nation. Karen didn't know that. She saw a woman living alone, a veteran who kept her lawn too perfect and her mouth too shut. To a bully, silence looks like a vacuum they need to fill with their own noise. The harassment didn't stop with the keys, it escalated into a slow-motion siege. Every morning, Miller's SUV was there, parked just outside my property line, just watching. One night my Ring camera chirped at 2:00 a.m. I opened the feed to see the HOA vice president, a man who looked like he'd never missed a PTA meeting or a chance to feel superior, walking my fence line with a high-powered flashlight. He was looking for violations, a chipped brick, a dead shrub, anything to feed the machine. I didn't yell through the speaker, I didn't call the cops. I simply downloaded the footage, backed it up to 3 different drives, and went back to sleep. The next week, the letters started arriving. Notice of non-compliance, improper landscaping. Notice of violation, gate noise. My gate is hydraulic, it makes less noise than a falling leaf. My lawn is edged with the precision of a parade ground. The lies weren't even creative, they were just a paper trail designed to bury me. The social shunning followed. Neighbors who used to wave now looked at their shoes when I drove by. The Neighborhood Watch Facebook group became a digital burn book. "Has anyone noticed the suspicious activity at 402? Officer Miller is there constantly. We need to keep our children safe." It was a masterclass in character assassination. They weren't just trying to take my pool access, they were trying to take my peace. The day of the special grievance hearing arrived on a Tuesday. The community center smelled of floor wax and desperation. Karen sat at the center of a long folding table flanked by the vice president and a secretary who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. The room was packed. Karen had invited half the street, a hand-picked jury of gossips eager to see the problem resident brought to heel. Miller stood in the back, arms crossed, leaning against the door, the local law enforcement presence, the silent threat. "This meeting is called to order," Karen announced, tapping a pen against her clipboard. She looked at me, her eyes gleaming with the triumph of a hunter who thinks the prey is cornered. "We are here to discuss the permanent termination of amenities for this property and the assessment of over $5,000 in accumulated fines for repeated willful violations of community standards." She spent 10 minutes reading the charges. She spoke about harmony, safety, and the fabric of our neighborhood. She painted me as a rogue element, a shadow in their sun-drenched paradise. "Do you have anything to say," she asked, leaning back, "before we make this permanent?" I stood up. I didn't bring a lawyer, I didn't bring a mountain of folders, I just had one manila envelope. "I have a few things," I said. My voice was calm, the same tone I used to brief colonels. "First, I'd like to address the surveillance." I pulled out a stack of high-resolution stills from my security cameras. I walked them down the table, laying them out like playing cards. "This is the vice president on my property at 2:00 a.m. on the 14th. That's trespassing. This," I laid down a photo of Miller's SUV, "is a record of 42 separate instances of a city vehicle being used for personal intimidation. I've already sent the full logs to the Internal Affairs Department at the precinct." The room went deathly quiet. I saw Miller straighten up in the back, his face flushing a deep, angry purple. That's irrelevant," Karen stammered. "We're talking about your violations." "We're getting there," I said, my tone tightening just a fraction. I pulled out a certified, stamped document from the county assessor's office. "You see, Karen, you've spent 3 months trying to find me for my lawn, my gait, and my attitude. But there's a small detail you missed in your rush to play queen." I placed the document in front of her. "My property is not in your jurisdiction. It never was. The previous owner opted out of the HOA joint agreement in 1994. It's recorded in the deed. I pay a voluntary fee for the pool, yes. But you have zero authority to issue fines, zero authority to inspect my land, and zero authority to tell me what color my mulch is." Karen's hands started to shake. She looked at the paper, her eyes darting across the legalese. This has to be a mistake. We've been sending you notices for months." "And I've been documenting every single one," I said. "And because you used an active-duty officer to harass a private citizen on land you have no legal claim over, you didn't just break a rule. You crossed a line into civil rights violations and harassment." I looked back at Miller. "I spoke to your captain this morning, Miller. He was very interested to hear about the special assignments you've been taking in this neighborhood. He's waiting for you at the station." The silence in the room was absolute. It wasn't the silence of peace, it was the silence of a vacuum. "But here's the twist," I said, leaning in so only the board could hear me. "I'm not just an independent homeowner, I'm a retired JAG officer. I spent half my career litigating jurisdiction and land use for the Department of Defense. I know exactly how much this is going to cost the HOA in legal fees when I file the suit tomorrow morning." I looked at the neighbors in the front row, the ones who had whispered, the ones who had turned away. "You all might want to check the special assessment clause in your own contracts," I said, my voice projecting to the back of the room. "Because when I win the settlement for the harassment, the emotional distress, and the illegal surveillance, the HOA isn't going to have the money. You are. Each and every one of you is going to be writing a check to pay for Karen's ego." The color drained from the faces of the audience. The murmurs started, but they weren't directed at me anymore. They were directed at the woman with the clipboard. "You're bluffing," Karen whispered, though her voice lacked conviction. "I don't bluff," I said, picking up my envelope. "I execute." I walked toward the door. Miller didn't block my way this time. He stepped aside, his eyes fixed on the floor, the weight of his looming disciplinary hearing already bowing his shoulders. As I reached the exit, I stopped and turned back. "Oh, and Karen, keep the pool keys. Between the lawsuit and the city investigation, I don't think you'll be the one in charge of the gate much longer. I'll just wait for the new board to invite me back." I walked out into the night air. The humidity was still there, but the weight was gone. I got into my car, drove home, and sat on my porch in the dark. I didn't feel like a winner, I just felt like a person who had finally found the quiet they'd paid for. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, someone else's problem, someone else's war. I just sat there, breathed in the scent of my own perfectly trimmed grass, and enjoyed the silence.